When I was in college, I remember hearing about a church that had a sign over every door that went outside. And it said, "You are now entering the mission field." Now that idea and what it represents is a pretty simple message. And it's something that believers, I think, need to begin to understand. When we're out in the world, when you go to work, when you have coffee with your neighbors, when you're working out at the gym, when you go to the grocery store, whenever you leave this building, you're in the mission field. Seeker sensitive was a term that was used quite a few years ago to describe a movement in churches and how they went about reaching out to the world around them. And this movement was patterned after Willow Creek Baptist Church and the philosophies and the successes that they had. Churches have changed a lot of their terminology over the past 20 years, and the new term is now missional. The bottom line, as I understand it, is that churches need to understand that what they do isn't just about Sunday. Churches don't exist simply for our services and our programs to maintain our building. Jesus told us to go into the world and to make disciples. And I believe that that's where the church has figuratively kind of dropped the ball at times. Instead of employing his go and do something strategy, the church has settled for a come and see appeal. We've said, here we are, here's our building, here's an entertaining worship service. We have great music and flashy graphics up on big screen TVs, and we have a dynamic preacher, so come and see what we have to offer. Come and see us. Now, granted, our weekend services are important, but that's not all there is to it. We're called to serve others, and that includes those not only in this community, but around the world. We're called to be missionaries. And the natural response of having a church that is full of missionaries is that you develop into a missional church. In the first 7 verses of Romans 1, you can see that Paul's mission was to take the gospel of Christ to the Gentiles. This was the driving force in his life. It defined who he was. And in tonight's text, in Romans chapter 1, verses 8 through 16, we get a glimpse of Paul's missional mindset. He gives us an example to follow, and it shows us how to develop the heart of a missionary. There are 3 things about the Apostle Paul that I want us to see tonight. First of all, he was consumed with the desire to minister to others. Paul's whole life was about helping people. He wrote the book of Romans after an extended missionary journey where he'd spent time planting churches and spreading the gospel. He was getting ready to go to Jerusalem to deliver an offering that he had collected for them because the Jerusalem church had quite a few poor folks in it. He then planned to go to Rome, and after that, he planned to go to Spain. Everything he did revolved around helping people to get connected to Christ. Listen to what he says here in Romans chapter 1, verses 11 and 12. He said, "For I want very much to see you, so I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, to be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine." Now, I want you to recognize some things about this consuming desire that Paul had. Notice that Paul said, to strengthen you. You need to zero in on that phrase here just for a minute, because Paul's consuming desire to minister to others wasn't just about surface level ministry. It wasn't just about numbers or getting a crowd together. He wanted to help people become mature, fully developed, fully devoted followers of Christ. He wanted to strengthen them. Just like he said to the church in Galatia, in Galatians 4:19. He said, I feel as if I am going through labor pains for you again, and they will continue until Christ is fully developed in your lives. Developing a missional mindset means that you work with an end result in mind. You have an idea of what it is that you're trying to accomplish in your ministry. If you're called to serve the poor, the purpose for your service is to help them hopefully come out of their poverty. If you're called to minister to those with broken lives, the purpose of your service is to help them put their lives back together. If you're called to reach the lost, the purpose of your service is to help them become fully stable in their walk with Christ. Having a consuming desire to minister to others comes with a vision for what it is that you want to accomplish. You work with an end result in mind. And the other thing I want you to notice about Paul's consuming desire is that it required persistence. Look with me at Romans 1, verse 13. He says, "Now I want you to know, brothers, that I often planned to come to you, but was prevented until now, in order that I might have a fruitful ministry among you, just as among the rest of the Gentiles." Successful ministry isn't something that happens the first time out of the gate every single time. Back when I was still in Topeka, Kansas, Don and I were involved in the first apartment community ministry in the state. But we didn't just walk into the apartment community that we wanted to start at and they welcomed us with open arms. That's not how it happened. You know, we didn't walk in and they didn't say, "What took you so long? We've been waiting for some religious group to come in here and help us." Yeah, that didn't happen at all, okay? Most ministries and most mission endeavors run into obstacles. And you know why? It's because Satan isn't thrilled at all about the stuff that's taking place. So he manages to put up roadblocks wherever he can. And let's face it, if Paul had simply stopped every time he ran into some kind of a negative issue, Christianity would never have gone any further than what it did. You don't give up just because something doesn't work the first time. You have to keep trying. Some of you here are already aware of your God-ordained area of leadership. You've already had a sense that God is calling you to serve Him in a certain capacity or a certain ministry. Don't make the mistake of thinking that if it doesn't come together quickly, that it's not going to come together at all. You're probably not going to hit a home run the first time you're up to bat. You probably won't get an overwhelming response the first time you reach out to others. Plan A might not work. For that matter, Plan B might not work. You have to keep trying. Paul was persistent in efforts of ministry because he was consumed with the idea of reaching people for Christ. If you want to change the world that you live in, if you want to make a difference for the glory of God, get consumed with an idea. And the second thing that I want you to notice about Paul is that he was compelled by a sense of responsibility. Paul was driven by the idea of spreading the gospel of Christ. He knew that he couldn't have any other career choice, and he simply had to devote his life to nothing else. Look at what he said in verse 14 here in Romans 1. "I am obligated both to the Greeks and the barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish." In the King James Version it says, "I am a debtor." Paul's saying, I owe it to everyone to share the gospel with them. He's saying, because of all that God has done for me, it's my obligation to share His goodness with others. In his letter to Corinth, in 1 Corinthians 9:16, Paul wrote, "For if I preach the gospel, I have no reason to boast, because an obligation is placed on me. And woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. Is there anything about you in which you can say, I am under an obligation? Woe to me, woe is me if I don't do it. Such as, woe is me if I can't participate in the children's ministry. Sorry. Just out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sylvia. That's not where Sylvia. She is not a woe is me if I can't work in the children's ministry. Or woe is me if I'm not involved in outreach. Woe is me if I'm not leading a Bible study. Woe is me if I can't disciple new believers. Woe is me if I can't go on this mission trip. Is there anything in your life that fits into that category? Or is it more like this? Woe is me if I don't catch this big fish. Woe is me if I can't take this great vacation. Woe is me if I don't get home in time to see the voice. What drives you? What compels you to move forward? Listen to what Paul said about himself. In Acts 20, verse 24, this is in the Contemporary English version, it says, "But I don't care what happens to me, as long as I finish the work the Lord Jesus gave me to do. And this work is to tell the good news about God's gift of undeserved grace." Paul didn't just want to reach others for Christ. He didn't just need to reach others for Christ. He had to reach others for Christ. He had no other choice. He was compelled. His attitude is the same one that we need to adopt as well. When we say, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Not only was Paul consumed, not only was he compelled, but I want you to see that he was convinced of what the gospel could do. Look in verse 16. It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is God's power for the salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and also to the Greek." The gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, has the power to change lives. It's the hope of the world. And that's where Paul received his boldness. He knew what the gospel could do. He'd seen too many changed lives and seen too many miracles in people to be timid about his faith. And really, when it comes down to it, the question of timidity versus boldness comes down to how fully convinced a person is in the power of the gospel. The more convinced you are about something, the less timid you're going to be. I've served in a lot of churches and over the years, and I've met a lot of different folks that were often very soft-spoken. Not a lot of those in this church. They wouldn't volunteer information or speak out in a crowd about anything until you got to a specific subject. And then they became quite outspoken. The person that comes to my mind was this lady who was passionate about certain vitamin supplements. She wouldn't give you her opinion on the weather if it was raining. But ask her about supplements, and she could talk for hours. Why? Because she was convinced that they worked. And in the same way, being convinced of the power of the gospel to change lives will give you boldness and energy to move forward in ministry. Paul was subjected to hardship and suffering throughout his entire ministry. In 2 Corinthians, he talks about many of the setbacks that he faced. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 24 through 28 says this: 5 times my own people gave me 39 lashes with a whip. 3 times the Romans beat me with a big stick, and once my enemies stoned me. I've been shipwrecked 3 times, and I've even had to spend a night and a day in the sea. During my many travels, I've been in danger from rivers, robbers, my own people, and foreigners. My life has been in danger in cities, in deserts, at sea, and with people who only pretended to be the Lord's followers. I have worked and struggled and spent many sleepless nights. I have gone hungry and thirsty and often had nothing to eat. I've been cold from not having enough clothes to keep me warm. Besides everything else, each day I am burdened down, worrying about all the churches. Now, why in the world would he subject himself to so much difficulty? It's because he was convinced in the power of the gospel. He knew that it could save people. He knew that it could change lives. Most people don't think sacrificing or don't mind sacrificing for a winning cause. And that may be what our problem is sometimes. Some of us aren't really sure that the ministry is a winning cause. Some of us wonder if we're doing any good. Some of us wonder if we're wasting our time. And all those feelings can happen when we don't get immediate results. When a person or a church decides to adopt a missional lifestyle, they soon discover that it's not as easy to live that life as it is just to talk about that life. There's hardship to face and opposition to endure. Sometimes you give more than you get back. And if you're not absolutely convinced of the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ, if you're not convinced that the work you're doing will change lives for all of eternity, you're going to be tempted to throw in the towel during the lean times. But if you're convinced of the power of the gospel, you'll experience a boldness in your efforts. You'll find the strength to continue. Difficulties, they won't deter you at all. You're going to keep pressing on. We are all called to be missionaries. We're all called to serve others, to minister in the name of Christ. Most of us do that right where we live. But at times, we're called to literally go to other parts of the world. This weekend, there's a group of 8 people that are going to Zambia to help Sherry Bumstead in the ministry there. They are, and they're listed at the bottom of your page of the notes. Bo and Karen Owens, David and Susie Gillum, Melissa Ferris, Quinn and Crystal Gillum, and Brother Paul Swearingen. They're going to be doing men's discipleship training, the Bush Medical Clinic, construction on cabinets that are inside the ministry houses, and working with the children of hope, with the kids with children of hope. 5 of them are here tonight. And we're going to lift them up in prayer here in a few moments. But before we do that, I'd like you to reach below you, well, in front of you, get a hymnal. Maybe that's a better way of wording that. Get a hymnal. Turn to hymn number 440. We're going to sing So Send I You, and then JR is going to come up, and he's going to take over at that point as far as commissioning them and praying for them as they go forth to do ministry. In places that, someplace I've never been. I've told y'all before that, you can keep playing. I told y'all before that, there was a song, choir song, back when I first got into the ministry, that was called, Lord, Please Don't Send Me to Africa. It's a choir song, and it was about a guy that, who had asked the Lord to use him in mighty ways, but Lord, please don't send me to Africa. Do anything you want. I'll do anything you want, Lord, but please don't send me to Africa. I've never had that opportunity. Many of them, this is multiple times that they have gone to share and to work and minister in Africa. So we're going to sing this song, and then I'm going to turn it over to JR. But just remember, once you leave this place, you are entering the mission field. Let's sing together, So Send I You. So send I you, by grace made strong to triumph, o'er hosts of hell, o'er darkness, death, and sin, my name to bear, and in that name to conquer. So send I you, my victory to win. So send I you to take to souls in bondage the word of truth that sets the captive free, to break the bonds of sin, to loose death's fetters. So send I you to bring the lost to me. So send I you, my strength to know in weakness, my joy in grief, my perfect peace in pain, to prove my power, my grace, my promised presence. So send I you, eternal fruit to gain. So send I you to bear my cross with patience, and then one day with joy to lay it down, to hear my voice, well done, my faithful servant, come share my throne, my kingdom and my crown. As the Father has said,